March 13th, 2006, Winnipeg, Manitoba. A helicopter holds altitude over a 4-lane intersection, its rotor wash flattening the slush in the gutters below. A bank branch sits ringed by unmarked cruisers and one armored tactical van. Officers stack at the glass doors in a tight diagonal line, rifles up, eyes on the breach point. 2 patrol cars block the side street, light bars cycling silent and red. A few storefronts down, a shop owner stands in his doorway in shirt sleeves despite the cold, phone pressed to his ear, narrating the scene to whoever picked up. Inside a command vehicle, a dispatcher repeats the same line into 6 headsets. Subject believed contained. 60 meters from the breach line, in a parked Dodge Caravan, a man checks his watch. A half-eaten sandwich sits on a napkin on the passenger seat beside him. He is wearing a headset. Not a phone, not a Bluetooth earpiece, a scanner headset, tuned to a single frequency, the same one the breach team is using to count down to the door. He hears the countdown. He hears the order to go. He turns the key. By the time the entry team is through the glass, the vault sits open and empty. The only trace of anyone inside it is a 6-digit code, logged at 12:04 a.m., a code no one outside that bank should have known. He has been listening to the Winnipeg Police Service for months. He knows, to the second, how long it takes a cruiser to reach this exact intersection from 3 different stations across the city, and he has known it for weeks before tonight ever happened. How does a man listen to the police hunting him in real time and still stay a step ahead of every word? How does he know the precise second their patience runs out? And what kind of person needs to keep proving it? Job after job, long after the money has stopped being the point. His name is Gerald Blanchard, and long before Interpol learned to spell it, he was a quiet 8-year-old in a modest Winnipeg house, the kind of kid teachers describe as no trouble at all. While other boys on the street spent their Saturdays on a frozen rink, Gerald sat at the kitchen table with a Phillips head screwdriver, taking the family alarm clock apart to watch how its gears argued with each other. He put it back together afterward. It still worked. By 9, alarm clocks weren't enough. He moved on to the family VCR, tracing its circuit board late into the night, until he found the chip that blocked it from picking up broadcasts outside its assigned region, and then he disabled it. The VCR began receiving channels it was never built to receive. Nobody taught him this. He found it the way some kids find a sport they're good at. By accident first, then on purpose, every day after. His mother started finding radios under his bed. Not whole radios, disassembled ones, guts spread across a towel, half understood and waiting. Every device in that house was a locked door to him, and he wanted a key to every one of them. Then at 12, the family relocated to a small town outside Omaha, Nebraska, chasing his stepfather's job. Within months, paperwork arrived. A $2,000 shortfall, a foreclosure notice. Men in suits quoting statutes a 12-year-old had no way of understanding yet. Gerald watched his mother cry at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once taken apart an alarm clock, just to see how it worked. He watched the county sheriff walk up the driveway and tape a notice to the front door. He watched his mother say nothing back, because there was nothing in the rules that let her, and he watched the suits leave, without once raising their voices, because they didn't need to. The rules did the raising for them. Gerald didn't learn, that day, that the world was unfair. He'd already half suspected that much. What he learned, watching that notice go up, was colder and more useful. Institutions don't run on fairness. They run on rules. And rules, unlike fairness, are just code. Code can be decoded. By 15, Gerald had moved from taking devices apart to testing the rules that governed people. He shoplifted Walkmans and cordless phones from a Best Buy outside town, palming them past sensors that only watched the doors, never the shelves. Then he forged the return receipts on his school's photocopier, matching the font, the spacing, even the faint smudge of a register stamp, and walked back in for cash refunds on merchandise he'd never paid for in the first place. The store's loss prevention system wasn't broken. It was built on an assumption.
that a polite teenager with a confident smile and a receipt in hand wasn't a thief. Gerald found that assumption sitting in plain sight, and he spent it like currency, store after store, town after town, until the math stopped making sense to anyone but him. At 16, while his classmates worried about driver's permits, Gerald paid cash for a house outright. The real estate agent didn't ask where a teenager got that kind of money. Nobody's system was built to ask. Then came the cornfield. One frigid Nebraska night, Gerald and a friend agreed to help a third teenager torch his own car for the insurance money. They doused a rusted Pontiac in gasoline, too much gasoline, and struck a match. The fireball turned the horizon orange. Sirens were already wailing by the time the smoke spiraled into the dark. Gerald's accomplice ran for the tree line. Gerald walked the other way, hands open and visible, already rehearsing his concerned citizen routine for the approaching cruisers. The officers smelled accelerant on his jacket before he finished his first sentence. He was cuffed and delivered to the county sheriff's station. Inside the interrogation room, deputies left him unshackled. A scrawny 16-year-old in a Nebraska farm town wasn't a flight risk, not in their judgment, and stepped out to confer with the duty sergeant. Alone, Gerald studied the room. Cinder block walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, a two-way mirror, and above it all, a drop ceiling, standard acoustic tiles, an aluminum grid, maybe 18 inches of crawl space behind it. He climbed onto the table. He pushed a tile aside. He pulled himself up into the dark. With cold ductwork pressed against his ribs as he army crawled toward the rear of the building. Below him, a door opened, and a deputy shouted his name into the empty room. Gerald kept moving. He reached a junction above what sounded like a storage room, punched through a tile, and dropped onto a shelf of file boxes. Seconds later, he was out a rear fire exit and into the night air. In the gravel lot, his friend sat in an idling Buick with a Radio Shack scanner pressed to one ear. Through the static came the dispatch chatter. Suspect in the vents, locked down the building, and headlights flicked on across the lot. Gerald sprinted across the frozen gravel, breath fogging in the cold, wrenched the door open, and dove in. As they peeled out onto the county road, he was clutching two things he'd grabbed off an unattended desk near the exit: a deputy's badge and a Motorola police radio. Neither one was worth anything. He kept them anyway, a teenager's trophies from his first real escape, and, though he didn't know it yet, a preview of the only tool that would ever matter more to him than a lockpick. That night rewired something in Gerald. Systems, locks, alarms, institutions, they were all built by people, and people built in their own assumptions, without ever noticing they'd done it. The sheriff's department assumed a teenager wouldn't think to check the ceiling. They assumed a suspect wouldn't walk toward the cruisers. They assumed their own dispatch frequency was private. Every assumption was a door left unlocked. His job, from here, was simple: find the assumption, walk through the gap it left behind, and vanish, before anyone noticed the door was open at all. By his mid-20s, back in Winnipeg, that instinct had calcified into a theory. A bank, Gerald had decided, was just a system, no different in principle from an alarm clock or a VCR. It only looked more intimidating because of what it guarded. Vaults ran on time-lock schedules. Alarms ran on circuit logic. Cameras held fixed angles with predictable blind spots. The same way a security guard's patrol always followed the same comfortable loop. The only genuinely unpredictable variable in any of it was the human response. The guards, the managers, and above all, the police. Whoever controlled that variable controlled the outcome. Everyone else was simply hoping nothing happened.
Most thieves case a target, then run the moment things go loud. He would plant surveillance inside a target weeks before the job. He would tap the frequency the police used to talk to each other. He would trigger a false alarm just to clock, to the second, exactly how long a real response would take him. Then, on the night that mattered, he would work inside that window, 6 minutes, 7, 8, and be gone before the first set of tires hit the lot. The cops wouldn't be chasing him. They'd be arriving to guard a crime scene that had already finished happening, hours or days after he'd already finished happening to it. He called it a reverse stakeout. It sounded, even to him, like a pitch for a movie no one would believe. He needed a target patient enough and quiet enough to prove it could work in real life, somewhere with empty rooms, no regular staff yet, and weeks of silence before anyone would notice a wire that didn't belong. In the spring of 2004, he found one, a brand new Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce branch in suburban Winnipeg, still weeks from its grand opening. Drywall dust still hung in the air. Painters were rolling beige onto bare walls. A row of 7 ATMs sat waiting for technicians to finish calibrating them, untouched, unguarded, unremarkable. There was no dramatic moment where Gerald decided to do it. No declaration, no argument with himself. 3 nights before the doors were due to open to the public, he simply picked the service door lock and let himself inside, wearing black gloves and soft-soled shoes, the same unremarkable way a contractor might let himself in to finish a punch list. He didn't take a single dollar that night. Not yet. Instead, he built a surveillance network into the bones of the place. A wireless pinhole camera, no larger than a shirt button, went in behind a ceiling vent directly above the branch manager's desk. A $40 baby monitor transmitter, the kind sold off a shelf at any Walmart, fit behind an electrical outlet beside the alarm control panel. A voice-activated audio bug, ordered from a spy gadget catalog, went under the customer service counter. He tested each device with a handheld receiver, confirmed every signal came through clean, and slipped back out the way he came, relocking the door behind him. For the next 2 weeks, Gerald parked a rented van within range of his transmitters, sometimes in a grocery store lot, sometimes on a quiet residential street, always close enough to listen, but far enough to be just another commuter, killing time in his car, and listened. He logged the security guard's patrol, a 12-minute loop, starting at the front entrance, sweeping clockwise through the lobby, pausing at the ATM vestibule, then back to the break room. Clockwork, every time, down to the minute. He logged the cleaning crew's schedule, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9 to 11 at night. 2 women who never once checked the server closet, who left the same radio playing the same station every shift. He mapped the camera blind spots, a 6-foot stretch of corridor near the fire exit, a wedge of shadow beside the ATM room door. And one morning, through his ceiling camera, he watched the branch manager punch the alarm code into the keypad, all 6 digits, captured clean, her shoulder dipping a half-inch lower on the 4th and the 6th, and committed it to memory. At 3:15 one morning, he jiggled the service door just enough to trip the magnetic sensor, then retreated to his van to listen to what happened next. 2 Winnipeg cruisers arrived in exactly 8 minutes. Officers circled the building with flashlights, rattled the locked doors, confirmed no sign of forced entry, and radioed it in. False alarm. Premises secure. They were gone again in under 4 minutes. Gerald wrote one line in his notebook. 8-minute window, minimum. On May 15, 2004, one night before the branch's public opening, Gerald returned at 12:04 a.m. His girlfriend, Angela, waited in a sedan down the block, an encrypted walkie-talkie in her lap, eyes on the street. Gerald let himself in through a side door he'd pre-loosened weeks earlier. The alarm keypad glowed red in the dark lobby. He punched in the 6 digits he'd memorized off a manager's shoulder movements. The light blinked green. Silence. The vault itself wasn't worth the time. Cracking it meant a torch, or explosives, and both meant noise. His real target stood 30 feet away. 7 brand new ATMs behind a glass door, each one loaded with roughly $100,000 in banded 20s and 50s for Monday's grand opening. The glass door was already unlocked. A Friday afternoon oversight. An employee rushing home for the weekend who never thought twice about it. Sometimes even careful planning gets a gift it didn't earn. Gerald had rehearsed this exact motion for weeks, on a decommissioned ATM he'd bought at auction and rebuilt in his garage. He knew precisely where to set the pry tool, exactly how much pressure it took before a faceplate popped free.
He worked fast. 4 minutes in, 3 machines stood open, cash cassettes stacking up in a canvas duffel. 6 minutes in, 6 machines down. He left the 7th, untouched. Deliberately. A loose thread for investigators to chase later. A clue pointing toward a thief interrupted. Or working with incomplete information. Anything but the truth. 7 minutes in, he zipped the duffel. Roughly $750,000 in banded bills. He let himself back out the side door, relocked it behind him with the same pick, and slid into the waiting Dodge Caravan. No squealing tires. He pulled away with the headlights off, merging onto a quiet residential street, Angela trailing a block behind. 8 minutes and 14 seconds after Gerald first stepped through that door, 2 Winnipeg cruisers roared into the parking lot, light bars flashing. Officers circled the building on foot, rattled doors that were still locked, peered through windows that were still intact. Everything looked pristine. They radioed it in. False alarm. Premises
All
secure.
units, perimeter
The
is secure.
cruisers pulled
False
away.
alarm.
3
Standing
blocks
down.
off. Gerald killed his engine in an alley.
Copy
and
that.
listened.
Returning to base.
The baby monitor was still transmitting from the ceiling vent, and through it came the officer's own chatter, confirming the all clear to dispatch. He let himself smile. The police had just guarded a crime scene, without ever knowing a crime had taken place inside it. Monday morning, the branch manager unlocked the front doors, flipped on the lights, and stepped into the ATM vestibule to do a routine check before opening. 6 of the 7 machines stood open, cash cassettes gone, faceplates pried off with surgical precision. The 7th sat exactly as it had been left, a small, deliberate piece of misdirection nobody in the room would recognize as one. She screamed. Investigators arrived within the hour. There were no fingerprints. The DVR hard drives had been physically removed from the server closet. Every door and window showed no tool marks, no broken glass. The alarm log showed the system armed all night, save for one brief, correctly coded disarm at 12:04 a.m. It looked, to every officer on scene, like the thief had walked through solid walls. Gerald listened to all of it through his audio bug.
They're looking for a night guard.
He heard a detective float the theory that the night guard had been in on it. He heard the branch manager deny any inside knowledge, voice rising, close to tears.
I have
From a
no
burner
idea
phone,
where the money
in a
is.
disguised voice, he
The
called the
records
lead
show you were
investigator,
here.
pretending to be a
I was
nervous
in my
witness who'd
office.
seen the guard meeting
Ask
someone in the
security.
parking lot. He called the bank's regional security office, posing as an anonymous tipster, hinting that the ATM service technician might have copied a master key. He even let 2 days pass before either call, long enough that each tip would read as a separate, unrelated lead, rather than the work of one man steering the investigation from 60 feet away. Each tip sent the case down a different dead end, buying Gerald weeks of breathing room, while Winnipeg's major crimes unit chased a ghost that, in a very real sense, already knew their entire playbook. The van that had idled outside that branch for 2 weeks was a rental, and buried in its paperwork, in plain ink, sat a name, Gerald Daniel Blanchard. It started small. A maintenance worker near the lot noticed the same van parked there one time too many, and scribbled its plate on a napkin, more out of habit than suspicion. The plate found its way into an investigator's hands. The plate traced back to a rental agency, and the agency's file had a real name attached to it. For a man who'd spent months defeating cameras, alarms, and police frequencies, it was an almost laughably ordinary mistake. He had, in effect, signed the crime scene himself. When investigators ran that name, their stomachs dropped. This wasn't a lucky amateur on his first job. Blanchard's name connected to a string of unsolved, technology-enabled thefts, stretching across 3 provinces, and buried in Interpol's database sat a flag tied to a case 6 years older, a theft that had made international headlines and was never, officially, solved. Years before the Winnipeg job, on a backpacking trip through Central Europe, Gerald had found a target that finally matched the scale of his ambition. The Sisi Star, a 10-pointed diamond hair ornament crafted in 1864 by a Viennese court jeweler, once worn by Empress Elizabeth
The Empress
of Austria,
had these stars
assassinated in
crafted by
Geneva in
Kite himself.
1898, and still, decades later, an object of national reverence. 27 diamonds radiated out from a single lustrous pearl at its center. It sat under glass, inside Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace, a 1,400-room complex, wrapped in motion sensors, pressure plates, infrared beams, and armed guards on a rotating walk. Exactly the kind of problem Gerald couldn't leave alone. Posing as a wealthy Canadian tourist with an interest in Habsburg history, he booked a private tour of the palace's treasure room. While the guide recited dates and names, Gerald memorized camera positions, clocked the sweep pattern of the motion sensors, and found, in a side gallery, a window secured by nothing more than an old-fashioned brass hook. No electronics, no sensor, just a latch a building inspector from a century earlier had never imagined needed updating. He lingered behind the group, pretending to admire a tapestry, and quietly flipped it open. On his way out, he stopped at the gift shop and bought a $20 replica of the star, complete with plastic diamonds and a faux pearl, paying in cash like any other tourist. The following night, a rented Cessna climbed to 4,000 feet above Vienna's western suburbs. Gerald sat in the co-pilot seat, parachute strapped to his back, goggles pulled down over his eyes. The pilot, paid well, asking no questions, gave the signal over the palace grounds, and Gerald stepped out into the wind. A crosswind caught him on the way down.
He slammed onto the sloped tile roof, skidded, and for 3 full seconds, hung 4 stories above a cobblestone courtyard, fingers locked around a strip of copper guttering. He hauled himself back up, breathing hard, and crept along the roofline to the window he'd unlatched the day before. It opened at his touch. The treasure room glowed under dim emergency lighting. The star sat on its velvet pedestal, beneath a glass dome, exactly where he'd left it in his memory. Gerald stepped carefully around a pressure-sensitive floor tile he'd noted on the tour, loosened the 4 screws holding the dome in place, and found what he'd expected, a weight sensor beneath the star, calibrated to the gram. One sudden shift in mass, and steel shutters would seal every exit in the building. He had one motion to get this right. Replica in his left hand, real star pinched between the fingers of his right. Lift, place, release, all in a single fluid gesture. A red light on the sensor base flickered. It turned back to green. The weight difference fell within tolerance. No alarm. He resealed the dome, retraced his path to the window, and was over the garden wall and gone before sunrise. By dawn, he was on a train to Munich, the real star, wrapped in a dirty t-shirt at the bottom of a scuba duffel. 2 weeks later, Austrian officials held a press conference to unveil the recovered star to international media. Flashbulbs went off. Dignitaries applauded. Not one person in that room noticed the piece under the lights was the $20 gift shop fake. The switch wasn't discovered until a routine insurance appraisal a month later, by which point the real star sat in a shoebox in Gerald's grandmother's basement back in Winnipeg. The ATM phantom and the palace ghost were the same man. By 2006, 2 veteran Winnipeg detectives had convinced their department to fund a covert operation built around one name. They called it Project Kite. For months, the task force wiretapped every phone number and safe house they could connect to Gerald, papering their office walls with maps, photographs, and aliases. The same patient, methodical mapping Gerald himself had once used on a bank. In late January 2007, a call cracked it open. Gerald's voice, barely above a whisper. "I can't talk now. I'm in the middle of something." He was crawling through the ductwork of a credit union in Chilliwack, British Columbia, mid-burglary, while the task force triangulated his cell signal in real time, the way he had once triangulated theirs. On January 23, 2007, at 4:30 in the morning, tactical teams hit multiple locations at once. In Vancouver, a dozen officers breached Gerald's condo door. Flashbangs went off in the living room. Gerald lunged for a window and found a wall of gun barrels waiting on the other side. No ceiling tile to push aside this time. No vent to crawl through. No idling Buick in a gravel lot. The ghost was cornered. Simultaneous raids across 3 provinces turned up high-powered laptops, lock-picking kits, stacks of fake identification,
cash in 6 different currencies, wigs, police scanners, and unopened baby monitors, still sealed in their original packaging, ready for the next target that had never come. In Winnipeg, officers pried open a crawl space in his grandmother's basement and found the Sisi Star, still wrapped in cloth, exactly where he'd hidden it, nearly a decade earlier, undisturbed through every birthday, every holiday dinner, held in the rooms above it. In the interrogation room that followed, 2 of the lead detectives from Project Kite sat across a steel table from him, thick folders of evidence stacked between them, photographs, transcripts, inventories. They expected silence, or a demand for a lawyer. Gerald gave them neither. He leaned back, studied the senior detective's face for a long moment, and asked, in an easy, conversational tone, how Karen was doing. Still teaching 3rd grade at Balmoral Hall? The detective's expression didn't move. Karen was his wife. Balmoral Hall was her school. Neither detail existed in any file connected to this case. Gerald turned to the second detective with a small smile, and asked about his son James. Made the hockey team this season, didn't he? Left wing? Neither man had ever shared his family's name with anyone on the investigation. Gerald had been listening to them for months, through unencrypted radio chatter, through unsecured cell calls made from parked cruisers, through careless conversation in coffee shop parking lots within range of a scanner. He knew their routines. He knew their families' routines, the schools, the practice schedules, the small, unguarded details 2 careful detectives had never once thought to guard. For one long moment in that windowless room, the interrogators became the interrogated, and Gerald let the silence sit there, unhurried, watching it do the work for him. The bravado didn't change the evidence stacked against him. Surveillance footage from the Chilliwack job. Fingerprints from his garage ATM replica. The recovered star. A storage locker inventory that read like a plot list from a spy film. He faced 164 years, across multiple counts of theft, fraud, conspiracy, and international trafficking in stolen cultural property. He chose to cooperate. Over weeks of debriefings, he walked investigators through every technique he had ever built. Cloning alarm signals with modified baby monitors. Eavesdropping on dispatch frequencies, with off-the-shelf scanners. Building full-scale replicas in his garage, to rehearse a job, before he ever touched the real thing. Timing police response windows down to the second, using staged false alarms. One veteran detective admitted, flatly, that in his entire career, no suspect had ever explained, in that much detail, exactly how he'd been beaten. Gerald personally led officers to the crawl space, where the star had waited 9 years, lifted it out himself, and handed it over with something close to courtesy. Austrian authorities arranged its return to Schönbrunn Palace, where it remains on display today, under considerably tighter security. He pleaded guilty on multiple counts. Prosecutors asked for the maximum. The judge handed down 8 years,
The defendant,
a fraction of
you are
the
sentenced
theoretical
to 8
ceiling,
years.
weighed against his cooperation, and perhaps a grudging respect for the sheer audacity of what he'd pulled off. True to a code he never broke, Gerald named no one. Every partner who had ever driven a getaway car, stood lookout, or moved stolen goods, walked free, protected by the same silence he'd once used to walk out of a sheriff's station. He served roughly 4 years before earning parole. By 2010, security consulting firms were paying him to audit the very systems he used to defeat. Testing bank alarm networks, advising on radio encryption, training loss prevention teams to think the way the men who once hunted him had to learn to think. A fox, hired to redesign the henhouse, and paid well for the privilege. Police departments across Canada moved to overhaul their communications in the wake of what Project Kite uncovered. The unencrypted tactical frequencies Gerald had listened to for years were phased out for encrypted digital channels. Banks rebuilt their ATM protocols, added redundant weight sensors, and started randomizing the schedules for cash deliveries. The same predictable clockwork Gerald had once logged from a parked van, now deliberately broken on purpose. Gerald hadn't only stolen from these institutions. He'd forced them to evolve. Years later, a journalist asked him about it, and Gerald answered without much ceremony. When you're a kid, everyone dreams of robbing a bank. He actually did it. The press settled on calling him the world's most ingenious thief. But the title misses the part that actually matters. Every system built by people carries the fingerprints of the people who built it. Their habits, their blind spots, their quiet confidence that some doors don't need to be watched. Gerald never broke that rule so much as he kept proving it true, one institution at a time, one assumption at a time, until the assumption itself became the only thing he ever really stole. Somewhere tonight, someone else is parked within range of a frequency that was never meant to be public, clocking a response time down to the second, waiting for the gap between what a system assumes and what it actually protects. The game never really ends. It just moves to new frequencies.